There's a strange cruelty that life reserves for the very end. You spend 93 years building a world, a place that knows the sound of your footsteps and the weight of your memories, and then, just when you need its comfort the most, you are told to leave it. They tell you it's for your own good, and the worst part is, they say it with love in their eyes. That's the most painful part of this whole affair. It's not the arguments that break you, it's the silence that follows. It's the heavy, unspoken agreement in the room when my children visit, the pity that has replaced respect in their gazes. In that quiet, I can hear what they're all thinking. He's done. And for a while, after the fall, the most terrifying thing in the world was that I started to believe them. This house is more than wood and nails. It's the container of a life, and I'm not ready to be poured out of it just yet. This house is the only thing that still remembers me as I was. The third step on the staircase still creaks under my weight the same way it did when I carried my wife over the threshold. Her gardening gloves still hang by the back door, covered in the faint dust of a garden she hasn't touched in a decade, but they are there, a promise of a life that was real. My days are a quiet ritual now. I wind the old grandfather clock in the hall every Sunday, just as my father did. I make my coffee in the same chipped ceramic mug. On the surface, I am the stubborn old man who insists he's fine, but inside, in the quiet hours after my children leave, a cold fear settles in. It's the fear of my own body, this stranger that can no longer be trusted. It's the profound, suffocating dread of becoming a problem to be managed, a fragile object to be placed on a shelf in a clean, sterile room, far from the only world I have ever truly known. My days are governed by a rhythm this house learned long ago. It begins with the comforting weight of my favorite ceramic mug, the one with the small chip on its rim that Eleanor always claimed gave it character. The coffee I brew tastes of 50 years of mornings. As I make my way through the hall, the third step on the staircase groans a familiar greeting, the very same sound it made the day I carried her across the threshold, her laughter echoing against these walls. The world outside moves at a frantic pace, a blur of noise and change, but within these rooms, time follows its own rules. It's a place where every memory has a physical presence, a tangible weight, but lately, a new, unwelcome feeling has seeped into the comforting silence. It's the subtle betrayal of my own legs, the tremor in my hands that I try to hide. For my children, I project an image of unyielding control, but when I am alone, the fear is a cold, heavy blanket. It's the quiet terror that one of these familiar, beloved floorboards will be the last thing I see before a fall I can't get up from. Every Sunday evening, I perform the most important ritual of my week, winding the old grandfather clock in the hall. My father taught me the precise, gentle movements, his large, steady hands guiding my small ones so many decades ago. This is more than just keeping time. It's a solemn act of continuity, a quiet declaration that I'm still here, still the custodian of this family's history. This house is filled with such declarations. Her gardening gloves still hang on their hook by the back door, a dusty but powerful testament to a life lived fully within these walls. On difficult days, I find myself opening her closet, just to breathe in the faint, lingering scent of lavender and old books, a ghost of her presence that I refuse to let fade away. My children, in their loving concern, see these things as relics, as sentimental burdens I should shed for a simpler, safer existence. They cannot understand. Leaving this house isn't just about changing my address. It's about consenting to the erasure of my own story, agreeing to let these ghosts die before I do. The day they came to deliver the verdict, they brought a casserole. It's a strange and terrible kindness, to soften the blow of erasing a man's life with a home-cooked meal. They arranged themselves on the sofa, the one Eleanor and I picked out 53 years ago, and they sat with the careful posture of people about to do something they believed was right, but knew was cruel. My son Mark cleared his throat, the sound of it like a gavel falling in the quiet room. My daughter Sarah placed a gentle hand on his arm, a signal for him to be soft. They didn't look at me directly. Instead, their eyes drifted around the room, cataloging the furniture, the photographs, the life I had built, as if they were appraisers deciding which items were worth keeping. In their love, in their overwhelming, suffocating concern, I had ceased to be a person. I had become a problem to be solved, a delicate piece of family history that needed to be moved to a safer, more climate-controlled environment before it shattered completely. Then, the words came. It was Sarah who said them, her voice trembling just enough to prove she felt bad about it. "Dad," she began, her eyes finally meeting mine, filled with a pity so profound it felt like an insult. "We've been looking at some lovely places. A nursing home, but a really nice one. The phrase hung in the air between us, ugly and sterile. Nursing home. It was a foreign term in this house, a place built on self-reliance and the stubborn belief that a life, once started, should be finished in the same place. The sound of the grandfather clock in the hall seemed to stop. The light from the window dimmed. In that moment, the house felt like it was holding its breath. They had finally named my greatest fear, and in doing so, they had given it power. It was no longer a vague shadow lurking in the corners of my mind. It was a real place, with a brochure on the coffee table and a vacancy waiting just for me. It was the sound of a door being locked from the outside. They tried to explain it with a gentle, devastating logic. They spoke of safety, of round-the-clock care, of activities and social engagement. They had charts and pamphlets. They had done their research. They were so prepared, so unified in their loving concern, that my own voice felt small and useless. Every argument I tried to form died in my throat, sounding like the petulant complaint of a child. I wanted to scream about the creak in the third stair, about the way the morning sun hits the kitchen just right, about Eleanor's ghost that still sits in the armchair across from me. But how do you explain that a life is not a series of practical considerations? How do you tell the people you love that their sensible solution feels like a death sentence? Their love had become a cage, beautifully constructed and padded with good intentions, but a cage nonetheless. I was no longer a father to be respected, but an elder to be managed, and the betrayal of that shift was a physical ache in my chest. When they finally left, the silence they left behind was different. It was heavier, emptier. The casserole sat on the counter, a monument to their loving betrayal. I walked through the rooms of my home, but for the first time, they didn't feel like mine. I was a curator in a museum that was about to be shut down, a ghost haunting a life that was already over. I ran my hand along the worn spine of an old book, touched the cool glass of a picture frame holding Eleanor's smile, and felt a profound and terrifying sense of finality. The quiet, predictable rhythm of my existence had been shattered. My home was no longer a sanctuary. It was a holding cell. The familiar ticking of the clock in the hall no longer sounded like the steady heartbeat of my life. It sounded like a countdown, each tick bringing me 1 second closer to the day I would be forced to leave it all behind. The fight was no longer a quiet internal struggle against my own body. It was now a real and desperate war against the people I loved most. The days that followed were a quiet, suffocating kind of grief. I was grieving for a life I was still living. I would walk through these rooms and feel like an intruder, a spirit lingering after the body has been given its final notice. My own home, the one place on earth that knew the shape of my soul, had become a painful reminder of everything I was about to lose. I'd run my hand over the smooth, cool wood of Eleanor's rocking chair, and the gesture felt like a final goodbye. I'd stand in the kitchen, staring out at the garden she loved, and see not the blooming roses, but the face of a stranger who would soon be looking out this same window. The truth is, the silence was worse than the arguments. In the silence, I could hear what they were all thinking. He's done. And the most terrifying part, the confession I have barely whispered to myself, is that for a week there, I believed it. I truly believed my story was over, and all that was left was for someone else to write the last sterile chapter in a place I didn't know. There was a moment on the third night after their visit when I almost surrendered completely. I picked up the phone, my hand trembling, and I was going to call Mark. I was going to tell him he was right, that they should make the arrangements. The weight of being a problem, a constant source of worry for the people I raised to be strong and independent, had become too much to bear. It felt selfish to cling to these walls when it was causing them so much pain. For a moment, their relentless practical logic infected my own thinking. I saw myself through their eyes, a fragile liability, a collection of risks that needed to be managed away. We spend our whole lives building a home, a place that knows us. And then, at the very end, when we need its comfort most, we are told to leave it behind for our own good. There is a profound and terrible cruelty in that logic, even when it's wrapped in the suffocating warmth of love. I saw the logic, I felt its crushing weight, and I almost let it break me. I tried to escape into my routines, but they offered no comfort. Winding the grandfather clock on Sunday felt less like a continuation and more like a final, pointless task. The tick-tock no longer sounded like a heartbeat. It was the cold, mechanical sound of a clock counting down to an execution. The familiar creak of the third stair was no longer a friendly greeting, but a warning of my own instability. Every object, every sound, every slant of light was now tinged with the sorrow of an impending ending. I would sit for hours in my worn leather armchair, the one that still holds the faint impression of my body after all these years, and I'd just stare at the empty space across from me where Eleanor used to sit. The house was no longer a sanctuary, it was a mausoleum, and I was its last weary guardian, waiting for the doors to be locked for good. My fight was gone. I was just an old man in an old house, waiting for the end they had chosen for me. It was in my armchair, the one with the worn leather that knows the shape of my bones better than I do, that the end truly began to feel real. I had sunk into it after another sleepless night, the gray morning light filtering through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, indifferent ghosts. My body felt like a lead weight, a useless anchor holding me in place. The fight had drained out of me completely, leaving only a hollow echo of the man I once was. I was ready to make the call, to tell my children they had won, that their loving, sensible plan could proceed. I looked around the living room, at the geography of my life, the faint water ring on the side table, the worn patch on the rug where Eleanor and I used to dance, and I felt a grief so profound it was suffocating. I wasn't just losing a house, I was agreeing to my own erasure, and the silence of my surrender was deafening. I was an old man in an old house waiting for the end. My eyes, heavy with resignation, drifted to the mantelpiece, to the silver frame holding my favorite photograph of Eleanor. It was taken in the garden, right after she'd won her war against the aphids that year. Her hands were smudged with dirt, her hair was a mess, but she was laughing. A defiant, triumphant laugh aimed right at the camera, right at me. There was so much life in that look, so much stubborn, joyful fight. She never backed down from anything, not from a stubborn weed, not from an illness, not from the sorrows life threw at us. She would have seen their pity and their pamphlets, and she would have set them on fire with that look alone. In that moment, staring at her smile, a memory surfaced with a clarity that startled me. It was her voice, not in my ears but in my soul, saying what she always said when things got hard. "Well, Arthur, are you going to just sit there, or are you going to fix it?" The question hung in the quiet room, a challenge from a ghost I had almost forgotten how to listen to. And just like that, something shifted. It was like a locked door in my mind creaking open. I looked at the phone, then back at Eleanor's picture, and a simple, earth-shattering thought broke through the fog of my despair. The conversation was all wrong. It had been wrong from the very beginning. We were all asking the same tired, hopeless question. Where should I go? It was a question that had only one terrible answer. But what if that wasn't the question at all? I realized, with a surge of energy that felt like waking from a long slumber, that we should have been asking something else entirely. We should have been asking, what do I need to stay? The moment I changed the question, the world tilted back on its axis. The answers weren't there yet, but the possibility of them was, and that was everything. It wasn't about surrender or defiance. It was about strategy. It was about finding a third way, a path that existed between stubborn pride and quiet defeat. A new kind of silence settled over the room, but this one wasn't empty. It was filled with purpose. The lead weight in my limbs didn't disappear, but it no longer felt like an anchor. It felt like a foundation, something to build upon. I looked around the room again, but this time, I wasn't a curator of a museum about to be closed. I was a king surveying his kingdom, a territory worth defending. The creak of the floorboards under my feet was no longer a sign of decay, but a reminder of the house's strength, its permanence. The tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall was no longer a countdown to my eviction. It was the steady, reassuring heartbeat of my home, a rhythm I would not allow to be silenced. The war wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for the first time in a long time, I knew which side I was on, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was not done fighting yet. That morning, I didn't just wake up. I came back to life. The despair had been a thick fog, but Eleanor's memory was the wind that cleared it. I sat in my armchair, not as a condemned man, but as an architect studying a blueprint. My home was no longer a museum of a life that was over. It became a fortress to be secured. I looked at the long hallway not as a danger zone, but as a strategic problem that needed a solution, like a handrail. I saw the slick bathroom floor, not as a trap, but as a surface that required a non-slip mat. The fear didn't vanish, not at all, but it changed its role. It was no longer the monster under the bed. It was a scout, sent ahead to map out the terrain and show me where I needed to build my defenses. For the first time, I separated the weakness of my body from the strength of my will. My legs might be traitors, but my mind, I realized, was still the commander-in-chief. And it had just issued a new set of orders: adapt and overcome. With a steadiness in my hand that I hadn't felt in months, I picked up the phone and called my son, Mark. I asked him to put Sarah on the line as well. There was a long, heavy silence when I told them I wasn't going to the nursing home. I could feel the familiar arguments rising in their throats, the well-rehearsed lines about safety and their relentless worry. But before they could begin, I said something that stopped them cold. I told them, "Your plan is a good solution, but it's for the wrong problem. You've all been asking, where should Dad go? And that question only has one sad answer. But I've started asking a different question. What does Dad need to stay?" The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the silence of pity or frustration. It was the silence of surprise, the sound of a door opening in their minds that they never even knew was there. It was the moment I stopped being a problem they had to solve and started being their father again, a man with a plan. The conversation that followed was the first honest one we'd had in a year. The tension didn't disappear instantly, but it transformed. Their worry, which had felt like a suffocating blanket, now felt like a resource I could draw upon. We didn't talk about lovely places with social activities. Instead, we talked about practical things. We talked about a medical alert button, about grab bars in the shower, about a service that could deliver groceries. We talked about hiring someone to come in a few hours a week to help with the heavy cleaning. For the first time, they weren't talking at me. They were problem solving with me. I could hear the shift in Mark's voice from strained patience to genuine engagement. I could hear the relief in Sarah's tone as she realized this wasn't a battle she had to win, but a project we could build together. In that one conversation, I didn't just save my home. I reclaimed my place at the head of the table, not through stubborn pride, but through the quiet dignity of a man determined to write his own final chapter. It's funny, the things you think you understand about life until you reach the very end of it. I always believed strength meant standing on your own 2 feet, never asking for a thing, never admitting a weakness. But my greatest victory wasn't in refusing to fall. It was in learning how to accept a hand to help me stand back up, right here, on my own terms, in my own home. I learned that the most important conversations we will ever have are not about endings, but about continuations. My children's love was never the problem, their fear was. They were so afraid of losing me that they were willing to take away everything that made me who I am. By changing the question from, "Where should he go?" to "What does he need to stay?" we changed the future. We stopped planning for a death and started building for a life. This house is no longer a museum of my past. It's the workshop of my present. And the truth I found, etched into these old walls, is that true independence isn't about needing nothing. It's about holding the power to decide what you need and fighting for the right to have it. So now, the grandfather clock in the hall keeps its steady rhythm, and the third step still creaks its familiar hello. My home is my home. It is safe. It is mine, and it is filled not with the ghosts of what was, but with the quiet, stubborn joy of what still is. We spend our entire lives writing a story, filling the pages with love and work and sorrow and laughter. We build a whole world within those pages. The greatest cruelty is to let someone else tear out the final chapter and write a sterile, sensible ending for you because they are afraid. My story will end in this house, in this chair, surrounded by the echoes of a life I built and a love I never forgot. It will end on my terms, and so I leave you with this. Look at the stories being written around you, in the lives of the people you love. Are you helping them hold the pen, or are you trying to take it from their hand?